come back home to them that are still here. If you see a Gold Star family member, please take the time to just give them a hug and tell them that they're loved. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about a Medal of Honor winner. This is the first ever video record of a Medal of Honor, and it turns out it wasn't just one Medal of Honor this man won. It was two in the same action. So before we go there, let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Special Operations Command. This is one of the, I think, 10 commands in the United States that have to do with special operations. Now, everybody's kind of heard of the Navy SEALs. They're a preeminent Navy quick reaction force, but I don't know if people realize that the first special forces to be stood up, let's see how to put this, to initially be stood up was the Army Rangers. And the Army Rangers were to be modeled after the French Resistance. So Army Rangers are considered part of Delta Force, and their job is to drop in behind enemy lines and to help the people in the countries that are against whatever regime we're warring against, to help them be more effective in resisting internally what's going on. Now, this happened in Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan. But let's continue on talking about some of the groups that are part of the Special Operations Command. So each of our forces actually has people that are part of special operations like Navy SEALs. So in the Army, we have the Rangers and we have the Green Berets. And they're all considered part of Delta Force. In the Air Force, we have forward air controllers and search and rescue. What search and rescue does is they go in behind enemy lines to pick up downed pilots and others and try to rescue them before other forces can grab hold of them. Forward air controllers, remember when Ronald Reagan fired all the air controllers in the United States? Well, who took over that job? That was the forward air controllers that already existed within the Air Force. Now, what these people do is they attach themselves to the Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and the Green Berets, and they provide close air support. So their job is to contact air assets, know what's in the air, what's available, whether it's ordnance, whether it's on a drone or a bomber or a fighter attack aircraft or even a fighter aircraft, and know what's available to come to the aid of forces on the ground. And the other part that they do is they report. A lot of what Navy SEALs do, Rangers, Green Berets, is they sit behind enemy lines and monitor what's going on. People know about snipers doing overwatch for our forces like in Mogadishu or whatnot. But what they don't realize is most of the sniper's job is not actually being a sniper. It's monitoring. It's gaining intelligence. It's quietly doing reconnaissance for our commanders. Now, the Marines now have a special operations group. They're called MARSOC. They're the Marine Raiders Special Operations Group. And people don't realize that the Coast Guard also has a group, and they're called, search and rescue. So all these people find themselves under Special Operations Command, except for the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's under Homeland Security. And all these groups are involved with what's called quick reaction forces. So if we have somebody that's held hostage in a foreign nation or something like that, they'll go in and rescue them as long as they're U.S. citizens. And that's one of their jobs. Okay, now we can move on. So, after 9/11, the President, George Bush, said that we would be letting those who knocked down the towers know that we were there, and they were going to feel us as well. So that was became Operation Anaconda, and they were seeking Osama bin Laden. It's Osama bin Laden's terror group for attacking the World Trade Center towers, number 1 and 2 in New York City on 9/11/2001. This after George Bush had made his speech, we were sent into Afghanistan. Well, what happened initially is the Army Rangers went in to talk to the Pashtuns. Pashtuns were people who were against Ellie, what's the name of that group that is controlling Afghanistan right now? I just forget the name of them. Anyway, so the Army Rangers did what they call a halo jump. It means they jump out of an airplane at high altitude at night with oxygen on, and they do a free fall almost all the way to the ground. And then at the very last minute, they open their canopies of their parachutes. They land on the ground with all their equipment, and they go out and meet up with people who are going the same direction we are, and give them help on being able to more effectively fight against, like in Afghanistan, the Taliban, who were hiding Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's group. So the Rangers went in, and pretty quickly the Taliban were in real trouble because the Army Rangers went in, and of course they brought their forward air controller with them. It's embedded with them. And they started to bring in air support for the Pashtuns and started fighting the Taliban openly. Now, before we were really into this Operation Anaconda. So I want to explain to you what Operation Anaconda quickly became. There was a place called Tora Bora, and in Tora Bora, it was a really high mountainous area, littered with literally thousands of caves, and it was believed that Osama bin Laden was there. Now, why would he be there? Well, there's a place called the Khyber Pass. Now, for endless history, Khyber Pass is part of the Silk Road, and Osama bin Laden was trying to get into Pakistan. And I'm trying to think. Yeah. So the place he was trying to get to in Pakistan was called Peshawar, Pakistan. And this is one of the most dangerous cities on the planet. This is where SEAL Team 6 eventually found Osama bin Laden in his compound and dealt with him finally. So as we know from in the past, that instability leads to more instability. And when we have weak leaders, that are weak, bad things will happen. So while we believed we had Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora, held in an area, we had to go and get hold of the mountain peaks around Tora Bora and the Khyber Pass so that Osama bin Laden couldn't leave. Now, these are very, very high mountains. These are 10, 11, 12,000 foot mountains. And the way we got there was we went in with helicopters. So you guys are probably wondering why I'm going through all this information. So Osama bin Laden was part of extreme type of teaching of Islam in schools called madrasas. And in the madrasas, they were taught to be very, very conservative in their religion. And when the United States went into Saudi Arabia invited to defend Saudi Arabia, bin Laden had a violent reaction to having female U.S. combat troops in the area without head coverings and without having what's the word to use? It's not a chauffeur. Anyway, it's a person, a male family member being with them at all times. So, believing that Saudi Arabia is the Holy Land, the land of Mecca, they couldn't allow this insult to come upon the land of Saudi Arabia. So, Osama bin Laden decided to have some of his fighters take over some aircraft and, of course, attack the World Trade Center, because we had become the great evil for going into Saudi Arabia and preserving not only Saudi Arabia, but liberating Kuwait and returning to Kuwait, the Kuwaiti people, their country, and then leaving. We didn't stay, but bin Laden absolutely couldn't deal with this. Well, some of the peaks we landed on, one was called Takabar. Takabar. Let me see if I can find it. The name of it. Come on, baby. I can find this, Ellie. Bouncing around here. We were going to show you a video of this operation first, but Pawtucket Bar over at Bora Bora is we had a helicopter go to land on that peak, and the peak became known as Roberts Ridge. As a helicopter, this is a Chinook, the twin rotor helicopters. There was a Navy SEAL in the very back who was basically standing at the open door of the helicopter. And as our special forces in the Chinook twin blade helicopter came over the top of this peak, they were hit with a rocket-propelled grenade. And it caused the aircraft to shudder violently when it was hit. Now, a rocket-propelled grenade is a shoulder-fired grenade. It's actually on a pole. You can aim it, and when it's fired, it waits till it hits something, and then it blows up and it fragments, just exactly like a grenade would. Well, this blew out some of the hydraulics on this helicopter, and at the same time, it caused that helicopter to lurch, and a man by the name of Neil Roberts, who's a Navy SEAL, fell out of the helicopter. It looked like it was about 100 feet or so into the snow, and but with the helicopter being hit and losing hydraulic fluid very quickly, and even though they had some extra hydraulic fluid they were putting into the system as quickly as they could, they had to fly the helicopter away quickly, get it down in altitude, and just about crash land it. But they got it down and got hold of another Chinook helicopter and went back to get Neil Roberts because he was one of their people. We never leave our special forces or any of our military behind willingly. So all these guys that had just been basically shot down, knowing what was up there on that peak, got back in another helicopter and went back up to rescue Neil Roberts. Just upon landing, they got out of the helicopter, and their helicopter had to leave quickly before it was hit again. Their pilot was hit again. So they landed at night. They were functioning with infrared. And this was the first time that an operation like this had been recorded by a Predator drone owned by the Central Intelligence Agency. So as this fight opened up, they found themselves pinned down in an area and getting fire from three different directions. There were two bunkers and a place they called, I think, the Boulder, nearly between the bunkers. And a forward air controller by the name of John Chapman, he's a tech sergeant, he went towards the first bunker. Now, they're up there in thigh-deep, waist-deep snow on the top of this mountain. It's very rugged. There's no flat areas, and areas in it are almost vertical. And he trudged his way up towards this bunker because this group around him, Special Operations Unit, were taking fire, and they had broken up into 3 two-man teams. Now, John knew Neil Roberts was up near Bunker 1. And so he was very keen to get up there. And being the forward air controller, it was his job to get in air support to get him medevaced out. So he fought his way up to the bunker, and just within like 10 feet was going mano a mano with two guys with AK-47s, and John Chapman charged that bunker and took out the two occupants of that bunker, and in the process killed a donkey as well. He got into the bunker, and shortly after that, his team leader came in right behind him and got into bunker, and they went to assault bunker number 2 to suppress the fire, the gunfire that was being laid down on the other people of their SEAL team. Now, what they didn't know is there were several dozen Uzbek and Chechen fighters in bunker number 2. And upon charging out to assault bunker number 2, John Roberts was shot twice and passed out. One of the wounds was a lethal wound, and so the team leader went back to his other group, and they went up to a place called the Boulder, and they used a squad automatic weapon. It was called an M60. It's basically a belt-fed AK-47, if you will, but we call it an M60. And he had modified it so he was shooting it from his arms, and he had the belts swung over him. And in the process of attacking bunker number 2 from this height up on top of this boulder, he was hit by shrapnel from another shoulder-fired RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, and fell 10 feet down to his squad leader. The squad leader helped him with first aid, and then he and two other quick reaction Navy SEALs decided that they needed to leave that area and get help from an air asset to suppress these guys, because it was too much for the three of them to go up against all these Chechen and Uzbek fighters. So they literally gathered together, and rather than walk down the mountain, they just simply laid onto their backs and sides and slid several hundred feet out of the way of that fire from this bunker number 2. So it was really, really rough area. When John Chapman took out those first 2 fighters in bunker number 1, he had earned his first Medal of Honor. Now, I say he's earned his first Medal of Honor because something was going to happen here in a few minutes. But before that happened, the squad leader and the other Navy SEALs who had withdrawn called in air support. Now, there was what's called an AC gunship. It's an attack cargo C-130 that was orbiting the area high above, and they had 20 millimeter Vulcan cannons, the same type of cannon they use like on the F-16 and on the F-4 and on the F-15. They had two of those. They had a 105 millimeter howitzer, which is literally a howitzer, like artillery, mounted sideways in the airplane. And then they had, I think, some 40 millimeter shells as well, Beaufort cannon shells. So what happened was they started firing 105 millimeter ordnance into this area. It was around Neil Roberts and John Chapman, because John Chapman was believed to be dead, and they passed by Neil Roberts, and after Neil Roberts had fallen, he'd been executed by the people in that bunker. So the whole top of this mountain comes under fire, and it's just being obliterated, if there's any way to put it. Now, they didn't know that John Chapman was still alive, and he's going through all these concussions as all these weapons are landing around him. Of course, it's going to be deafening because they're nearly very close to being on him. There's, feet of snow and mud and rock being blown in all different directions. And during this craziness, John Chapman regains consciousness. Now, remember, he's already been mortally wounded. He's bleeding quite a bit. He's got to be lightheaded. But for John Chapman, he has just taken the bunker and was about to take on bunker number 2. Okay, he's been unconscious. All this other stuff's happened while he's been unconscious. So he wakes up semi-conscious or mostly conscious. We don't know for sure. But the first thing he does is he once again starts assaulting bunker number 2. And at that very moment, a quick reaction force with more SEALs and Army Rangers is coming in. And John Chapman got onto his radio, because he's forward air controller, and talked about the situation, told everybody what was going on, then attacked bunker number 2. Now, they were trying to contact John Chapman on the radio, but it was likely either the radio was damaged or John Chapman simply could no longer hear. So it's likely he's now fighting not only wounded, but as well deaf. He fights his way out and gets a bunch of more wounds. So now he's got up to 12 gunshot and fragment wounds in his body, and it's becoming daylight. Now it's becoming dangerous because they can't just use night vision goggles. Now they can be seen. And there's going to be a group of 3 different individuals that are going to try to assault and take John Chapman out. And he ends up fighting these individuals in waves. So there's a group of 3 of them. And if you see the part in the video, you may see where he's involved with hand-to-hand fighting of the second Uzbek or Chechen fighter. And he fought 3 of them in hand-to-hand combat for his life. Just as he's getting done with that, it's been now daylight for 45 minutes. He sees a helicopter come over the ridges, the new quick reaction force, and he knows that this pocket of Uzbek and Chechen fighters in bunker number 2 are going to fire on that helicopter. So he does the one thing he knows he's got to do, to protect not only his SEALs, but also the Quick Reaction Force and one of the forward air controllers coming in with that Quick Reaction Force, as well as a search and rescue individual that would be with that. So he goes and, with the very last of the ammunition, assaults bunker number 2, trying, and he goes out in the open because he sees that the helicopter could receive fire from a number of different directions. So he puts himself in between those two groups and starts firing on them with his M14. Now, an M14 is like an AR-15, but the military version, which means it's a very hardened version. It doesn't jam up as easy. It can put a lot more rounds down the barrel without becoming, having the barrel start to overheat and warp. It's a much more stable platform. Plus, it has a ability to have single, every time you pull the trigger, a round go down range, or you have two other selections. The second selection is every time you pull the trigger, 3 rounds fire off, or you can go to fully automatic. So John Chapman has the very last of his ammunition. He knows his helicopter is going to be in trouble, so he charges out, likely in fully automatic. And at that point, he receives the last of the 16 wounds and is shot through the heart, and thereby receives his second Medal of Honor. Posthumously, also, he was, as a tech sergeant, he was awarded the Master Sergeant rank. So this is all caught on video, and Ellie's going to show you a little clip. And the reason why I want to show you this is so you can kind of feel the gravity of this thing as it's happening in real life, and people are really struggling to survive in a very bad situation for our freedoms, to keep things like the World Trade Centers from falling down around us for the last 20 years or so. So this is kind of important stuff, and this is what we celebrate on July 4th. We celebrate our freedoms that have been brought to us by men who would go out and go out into fire to protect his comrades, his SEALs, his team around him. When they're in that situation, being patriotic may be a thing, may not be a thing as much, but fighting for each other is a very real thing, because if you don't help each other survive, you all die. Okay? So it is a struggle for absolute life at that point. So Ellie, you want to go ahead and put that on and let the viewers watch that for a second?
Yeah, I sure will. I've been showing it as you've been doing your report. So they have seen it.
All right. So, well, then you guys get the idea. But this is the first actually videoed. If you go and on YouTube and look up John Chapman and Roberts Hill or Roberts Peak, you can see a full-length part of that. Also on the History Channel, the Quick Reaction Force that came in after to save these SEALs and what they all went through is out there as well, and you can see an hour-long documentary on it. And there's also some animated explaining of what happened at Roberts Ridge as well. So this was actually SEAL Team 6 that got caught in this maelstrom up there. That Neil Roberts fell out of the aircraft when it was hit, and it would be SEAL Team 6 that would later just down, not very far from there, across the Khyber Pass into Peshawar, they would find the CIA would send in SEAL Team 6 to finally get bin Laden and stop this insanity of Al Qaeda. So, okay, that's our 4th of July. What would we call this, Ellie? Way to remember one of our fallen heroes, and remember all of our fallen heroes and our Medal of Honor winners, whether they're alive or not, went through similar things like this. This is not an aberration. This is something that strong fighting military men in our special forces and our other military commands are willing to do, not only for your freedoms and their families, but to protect each other. So, yeah, the 4th of July. When you think about going out to the 4th of July and the parades and then the fireworks are about this sort of situation. The fireworks are originally what happened when the British Navy was bombarding Fort Sumter, and the flag continued to fly. And of course, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem about it that became a song, and that became the Star Spangled Banner. And so for our entire history of our country, we've been going through things like this, and protecting the freedom of our country. And I'd like to say thank you to all of the servicemen and the families of those who have lost servicemen, and the people who have supported these servicemen, and the communities who have loved these servicemen. I'd like to say thank you to all of you. And I sure enjoyed the freedoms that I have, and I'm using one of my freedoms called the freedom of speech right now. And Ellie's got me out doing it. It's not really my thing to do this sort of thing, but I'm willing to do it to help us move forward, understand what's going on around us in this world. So, moving on to more regular news. In Polk County, Florida, 3 days ago, a man decided he was going to carjack or take a hostage in a car. And when the police tried to pull the car over, he wouldn't let the driver stop. And eventually, this car got high-centered, couldn't move on anymore. And Polk County and the other law enforcement agencies were able to contain the situation, and then finally call in the SWAT team and try to de-escalate the situation. This guy that was holding his hostage was doing, I can't remember if it was meth or crack or what it was. He just kept smoking that while this whole thing's going on. And finally, he got really dry mouthed and was willing to make a deal for some water. So he sent his hostage out to get baby in the car under a blanket, and he had the baby in a blanket, and so she was going to get the water and come back, but he was bluffing, and as soon as she got to where the water was, the sheriff grabbed her and pulled her to safety, and so now this guy is stuck out in a high-centered car with a myth. There is no baby, so he jumps into the driver's seat and tries to accelerate and winds the car up as fast as he can. And he's throwing rocks everywhere and hitting people and vehicles, but he can't get on high-centered. He can't get away in the car. And just about this time, he decides he's going to shoot at a sheriff, and he shot through the window, hitting a sheriff in the shoulder, and coating the sheriff with shards of glass. And luckily, the bullet traversed the guy's shoulder and went up, not down. And he's in the hospital now, the sheriff, and is recuperating it, and is recuperating from having glass removed from his face and his body from this thing. And of course, the SWAT team dispatched the guy for being, too violent to handle. And turns out this guy was afraid. He didn't want to give himself up to the police because he was afraid to go to jail because he was fearful of the Mexican cartels, whom he had close association. And so this guy who was here, his name Raymond Martinez, passed away. We don't know if he was a citizen or not, but likely not so much. Okay, moving on. Baltimore, Maryland. We had another block party that went bad. We have 2 dead adults and 28 wounded young people down to the age of 13. And I have an opinion on this sort of thing. Do you mind, Ellie, if I state my opinion?
Go ahead.
I believe we're dealing with this sort of thing all wrong. In the Old West, we had shootings and brawls and all kinds of chaos. And what happened right afterwards, as soon as somebody was arrested, a magistrate would come into town, okay, a judge, and he would hold a court. And the court would have findings, meaning they would interview people. They would, what do they call this? An investigative court, Ellie?
I believe
like
so.
They did to Trump, where they go in and everybody has to speak. Regardless. Or they can be thrown in jail, put in contempt. It's not the regular court. This is just to get the warrant, okay? So that's what they did. Then they issued an arrest warrant, right? Wanted dead or alive, or he's in jail. So now he's got to come into court, whoever's done the trespass, right? And they have an immediate court, meaning they bring in the prosecutor, they bring in the defense attorney, everybody gets to hear the same thing. Everything's been given over to the defense attorney. So the accused has competent help. The state has a competent prosecutor. There's a judge there to see that everybody follows the rules, right? He's the referee to the system. And then 12 people of the community judge the person who's been involved with the trespass. So you get a jury of your peers, and they go through the process. They hear the evidence. They hear witnesses. Witnesses are cross-examined. The whole process goes on, but it's not drug on for weeks, years. Okay? It happens in days. And when there's somebody's taken somebody else's life, after the verdict's been given, they're taken out and given their penalty right then and there. So if you take somebody else's life, you kill somebody, commit murder, you're dispatched. If you've stolen somebody's horse in the Old West, you're dispatched. By letting these things go on for far too long, letting attorneys take vacations, have special meetings, have time to just do endless research and write papers and all this other crazy stuff. If they went through and issued the penalty on stuff like this immediately, and if their attorney couldn't get a stay or an appeal fast enough, this guy would be gone, or girl would be gone before that the system ever got bogged down. So I'm just saying, justice delayed is justice denied. And this stuff keeps happening because we're not meting out justice. What we're having is endless bureaucracy involved with endless bureaucracy. Now that's great. People are making money. But there's a point at which children are dying in large numbers. And it doesn't matter if these people have a gun. It'll be a knife. It'll be a bomb. It'll be something else, because evil never sleeps. The only way to stop these sort of things is make it abundantly clear that you won't survive this a day or two, so that when people get afraid, when people get upset, when testosterone gets going and alcohol gets flowing and ignorance jumps to the fore, you don't go and pull a weapon and go at it, because you'll die quickly if you do that sort of thing. Living 10 years behind bars because you're afraid and you have to pull a weapon out in a situation like that and hurt a whole lot of people, that's a win. To get 10 years of food before you get your sentence carried out. We got to quit on these mass murders, allowing these things to drag out. It has to happen immediately. And that can be done by the courts, all right? Even if the plaintiff wants to waive their rights, the judge has to offer them to waive their rights. The judge can move this thing along if they choose. All right, that's my opinion. Okay, moving on. Israel, right, Ellie?
Yes.
So, there's a refugee camp in a place in the West Bank called Jenin, and because there were 8 people killed there, the IDF launched an operation into the refugee camp there, and it's ongoing right now, and it's a bad situation. So let's pray for everybody on both sides that this thing will de-escalate and everybody will start to get along a little bit. Okay, next. Our friends in Israel are receiving 25 new F-35 fighter jets, and that's good news. Bad news is Syria fired an anti-aircraft missile that landed in Israel. We don't know if it hit anything, but they fired an anti-aircraft missile into Israel. Apparently it didn't hit anything because it landed in Israel. Okay. So, in this area of Jenin, where all this chaos is going on and burning and fighting between the two sides, medics have been blocked from entering the riot area. So there's some criticism going on in Israel that the medics should be allowed to go in, and the military is saying no because the medics will get hurt or killed, and they don't want them in there until the fighting cessation of fighting occurs. All right. Now moving on, Russia is having their own internal crisis as this Wagner mercenary group has now turned on each other. Apparently there's a dispute and they're going at it hard in Russia against each other. Putin's none too pleased with it and is fixing to put all of them down. All right. What happiness? Remember earlier I said weakness leads to instability, and instability can lead to instability. That's what we're seeing. All right, we've got a little problem going on down in Eagle Pass on the Rio Grande in Texas. It's a migrant hotspot apparently right now, and we've got groups of people from Venezuela trying to come across the river into concertina wire, razor wire, and are being pushed back by our law enforcement as we speak. Bad news. Bad news all around. Now these people don't want to go back into Mexico because they feel like they're being exploited and might have to pay more money to the coyotes and the cartels, and so they're staying on the far bank hoping at any moment to be able to get through the wire. So they keep coming back and forth with their children, waiting with them over their shoulders. And this is a place where people have drowned in the past, and it's a bad situation. Let's talk about France. They had a shooting. Some police officers or some security people shot a teen. It was a bad situation, gone worse, and now they have riots in Paris. They've had 150 rioters jailed. They've got fighting in the streets and burning going on, and the refugees and the local people are not getting along. So much for borders, right? Okay, moving on. A judge in Texas has ordered the release of records on Uvalde shooting responders. Can I say something about this, Ellie?
Sure can.
So, hey guys, we got video. You don't need it. Just move on. Quit pushing paper and do your job. Okay. I feel better about that now, Ellie. Moving on to something more important. Vanna White seeking a pay raise. And Ryan Seacrest is about to join her show. That's great news. I bet everybody needs to know that, and that's important. And Vanna White, I know her from way back. Do you, Ellie?
Yeah.
That's like a 80s thing. I remember her being on TV and then flipping the channel and seeing Stevie Ray Vaughan. Yeah, that was a while ago. All right.
She like what, 60, 70 years old?
Well, Stevie Ray Vaughan, this was like 1987 or 86, I'm thinking. I had just 2 children back then and been married just 4 years-ish. And yeah, had a nice upstairs 2-bedroom apartment right up next to the mountains. And the deer came down and ate the shrubs every morning. The wind blew every night and hit the windows. Came down the mountain in these huge gusts. You could hear them coming down, the wind coming down through the trees, and then suddenly it'd hit the side of the building, and it'd shake the windows. Then you'd wait for the next big roll of cold air to roll down the mountain, and it'd just come down and pulp us all night. It was a way to really sleep well, I'll tell you what. You didn't care about what else was going on in the world because you could hear that air, cold air rolling down the mountain through the trees and about to bash into the side of your building. It was a lot of fun, actually. I enjoyed it. All right, moving on from Vanna White. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, has told President Biden, whether you agree or not, that the student loan forgiveness plan is a no-go. So the president's none too pleased with that. All right. I don't know if you guys remember the Parkland shooting down in Florida, where all those kids were hurt, and the school resource officer that was there for protection for the children didn't engage. Well, his name, I'm not even going to bring it up because it doesn't matter at this point, because he's been found not guilty. So good news for him. I'm not sure what that means for the rest of us, but he was found not guilty, and not guilty is not guilty. The Supreme Court of the United States has said that a web designer that does not have to create a wedding internet site for some folks that have some different ideas about what marriage is. All right. And moving on, SCOTUS has also brought about the end of where they can decide who and who can't come into school based on racial situations or ethnicity. They have to do it by merit. And so enrollment into the universities now requires, getting the highest score on the SAT or whatever, having the best packet, and grades. There it goes. Okay. Moving on. So, Janet Yellen, after Blinken going to China, is going to China and do her part. We're kind of encouraging those folks by sending these folks. Seriously, guys. Yellen, seriously? Come on, guys. All right, moving on. So the Ocean Gate submarine Titan, the owner, tried to get the former finance director to become the new chief pilot. And she refused, stating that the previous pilot had been fired because he had been raising safety issues. So Mr. or Stockton Rush was just kind of trying to push those dives a little too soon, I would say. And we also now have reports that college interns were brought on to, design the entire electrical system. So not grads, just interns. Just saying, guys. All right. We've had a small airplane crash just a little while ago in rural Alaska, a place called Old Harbor. Luckily, 3 have survived, but unfortunately, we have 2 dead. So that's not a good situation. Russia is now getting involved in a little privateering. They're grabbing up private fishing boats to use in their aid for Crimea. Bakhmut is now back into its full glory of meat grinding, and that's been going on. Also, somebody had brought up, who can we trust for Ukraine-Russia war information? And I have an answer for that. So in about 40 years, historians will have their take on it, and will likely have as good information as we're going to get. And that's that for information coming out of a war zone. Now, Seattle has a new problem. It's true. Crime is up, and the number of cops are now going down. And they have this little problem called what they call vigilante justice. You could even see this happening. Why would this happen in Seattle? Anybody got an answer for that? Yeah, leave it in the comments. We'll get back with you if you have something that's interesting to say about it, and maybe we'll have a discussion. So, Ellie, that's my report. I don't know if you have something else to add. Please, subscribe and get back and listen to us. We'll have information on the World War III report on Wednesday, and Ellie will have a show tomorrow on the news, and as well as lifestyle. What else do I have to say, Ellie, besides thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everybody has a 4th of July holiday tomorrow that you'll remember and you'll enjoy and you'll cherish. So, signing off from William here in Mid-State, Washington.
Well, William, we're glad to have you, and of course, tomorrow I'll have my news and in-depth review of kind of what you did tonight.
I just grabbed up what little news I could find. On a Monday before a holiday, there's not a lot of new news out there.
Well,
I had to kind of clean stuff for the last 3 days to fill up an hour program and come up with a little bit of information of my own.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see everyone tomorrow, and we thank you, William, for Okay, William. Good to know. All right. Bye-bye.